Story 1. It was cold for October, and would get even colder after the sun finished setting. Falling leaves kept whipping around my bike, occasionally hitting me in the face. I almost ate a few. Halfway to the spot, I stopped to turn on the flashlight taped to the handlebars. The light was slim and shaky, but good enough to navigate the dirt road that ran back to Meadow House. Lex and JD were sitting on the crumbling wall around the mansion, smoking when I pulled up. "Hey, look who decided to show up," JD said, tossing his cigarette into the gravel drive. "Mom wouldn't let me leave until I finished my English paper," I said, walking my bike over to the others, where they were leaning against a sturdier section of wall. "Where are Tone and Eddie-O?" Lex hopped off the wall and zipped her jacket up against the wind. "Ed's starting the fire and Tone's working on the food. Did you bring it?" I nodded and pulled a bottle of wine from my backpack. "Just one?" JD asked. The cabinet was low. I guess my mom hadn't restocked in a while. If I pulled more than one, she'd probably notice. Lex examined the label. "Is it any good?" "I have absolutely no idea." JD slid off the wall, smooth as water down a drain. He plucked the wine bottle from Lex's hands, turning it from side to side. JD tapped the glass. "Sounds good," he said. "Sounds red. Besides, Eddie smuggled some beers out from his place." The three of us walked through the broken gate, each of us touching the left post with the 4 deep scratches. It was our little ritual, a reminder of when we first started our campfire stories. Meadow House must have been beautiful once. It was massive, taking up several acres a few miles outside of town. It had a dozen rooms, a garden, and even a fountain in the courtyard. What Meadow House lacked was a roof. I mean, it still had bits and pieces clinging to the frame like scraps of clothing on a river-washed corpse, but the place was essentially a wreck. Holes pitted the walls, and all of the window glass had long since shattered from storms or stones. Kids used to come out to Meadowback in my parents' time when they felt an urge to break or burn, or just wanted some private space. My dad told me about it, but the cops put a stop to that when the house started to attract drug dealers. For a long time, Meadow House was left to rot. Then we found her. If there's a better place on earth to tell a ghost story, I've never seen it. I could smell the fire Eddie-O was building before I saw it. It was a perfect October smell, smoky and strong, dry wood cracking. Eddie always liked using old wood from deep in the forest around Meadow House. He'd show up early before the rest of us to start gathering. We usually set up in the garden just outside of the house. Occasionally we banked a fire over the stones in the courtyard. That required us to walk through the mansion, though, so it had to be a special occasion. While we loved using Meadow's grounds to tell stories, the house itself was deeply unpleasant. There was an odor in the house, mildew and bad air and other dying things. You felt like you were being watched any time you were inside the walls. Not just watched, but followed. Meadow House was a shell of what it used to be, but something seemed to linger. "Look who decided to show up," Ed said when we walked over. Yeah, JD already said the same thing. Ed had set up the fire in the corner on some open ground ringed by faded patio stones. The flames were already licking 2 or 3 feet up from the pit. There were still a few ounces of sunshine left in the day, but the edges were getting dark with purple smears on the horizon. I moved closer to the fire. I should have worn a thicker jacket, but I'd just gotten a red windbreaker that looked a lot like the one James Dean wore in Rebel Without a Cause. I knew Tone loved old movies like that, so I figured she might like the jacket. Tone was sitting on a big red cooler, heel tapping on a stone path, sipping Coke out of a glass bottle from a straw. She'd set up a small card table next to the cooler with hot dogs and chips, Esmore stuff, assorted snacks. There was a pile of sticks under the stable, so we could spear the dogs and marshmallows and cook them over the fire. "The buffet is open," Tone said, hopping off the cooler. "First come, first serve." She reached into the cooler, pulled out another Coke, and sent it sailing my way. "Don't open it yet, Chris," Tone warned. "It's gonna be shook up." We all gathered around the fire as soon as the sun was finally and fully sunk. It was freezing everywhere outside of the ring of light, but God, it was nice huddled up to the flame. I cleared my throat. Everyone was watching me, waiting for my story. "Have you heard the story of the sledgehammer slaughter?" I asked, launching into the tale. They found the first body smashed to pieces on the riverbank. Every bone was broken. The skull a shattered dish with bits of purple-gray brains leaking out. According to the medical examiner, the cause of death was blunt force trauma from a sledgehammer. Detective Rourke was. How could they know that the wounds were from a sledgehammer and not, like, a baseball bat? J.D. interrupted. "The shape of the blows, duh." Tone answered. "Now shut up and let him finish." I smiled and continued. They hung on every word. I was really proud of this story. I spent all week working on it. Half an hour later, it was over. Everyone sat blinking like we'd woken up from a collective dream or nightmare. After cleaning up and packing up, we all went our separate ways. I almost worked up the courage to ask Tone if I could walk her home. Next week, I promised myself. She did compliment me on my jacket, at least. I went home and immediately fell asleep. When I woke up, there were police and ambulances all over my street. My neighbors were murdered in the night. I stood at the living room window looking out, shaking. I didn't know the details at the time, but the way the cops darted around, their faces, and the sound of someone yelling out of view, it all put this lump of dread deep in my stomach. I knew something terrible had happened and maybe was still happening. The kind of awful that could reach out later and snatch me up if I wasn't careful. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, and on Monday at school, I found out what happened to my neighbors. The entire family of 4 was beaten to death, smashed to pieces, just like in my story. We debated whether we should skip campfire stories the next Friday, but that would mean breaking our tradition of telling a tale every week in October. That tradition had stood for nearly 3 years, so we ultimately decided to go ahead with it. The week after the murders was Eddie's turn. "Have you heard the story of the ravenous ticks?" he asked. Eddie's story was terrifying, but more than that, nauseating. Ticks the size of house cats that moved terribly fast. Victims walking around with the things hanging from them like swollen blood balloons. Lex actually threw up. Scrambling off the log she was sitting on to go puke in the garden. It was a good story if gross. Once we were done, I took a deep breath, walked over to Tone, and asked her if I could walk her home. She thanked me, but told me she had to bike home, so she could be back by curfew. I walked to Meadow House that night, so I couldn't keep up. "No worries," I said, smiling, praying for the ground to open up to swallow me whole. "Sorry, Mom would kill me if I'm as late as last week. Would you like to meet me in Stevens Park tomorrow morning, though? Just to hang out?" Tone asked. "Yeah, see you then." I practically floated all of the way home. My good mood ended when I met Tone at the park the next day. "Did you hear about Father Gunsel over at First Methodist?" she asked as I joined her on a bench near the park gate. "No, my family isn't really the church type." Tone leaned in close enough for me to smell the strawberry shampoo she must have used that morning. "They found the priest dead in his house last night," she whispered, "drained of all of his blood." "Jesus. Remind you of anything?" Tone asked. Tick, tick, tick. I felt a chill despite the sunny skies. "Eddie's story. Weird, isn't it? That poor family last week after your tale. Now a guy bled dry. You don't think I had anything to do with it, right?" She flicked my shoulder. "Of course not. No way. But it's too much to be a coincidence, Chris." I glanced around the park, the chill getting worse. The trees around us were covered in red and orange leaves, full-on autumn arrested. They reminded me of the campfire we gathered around each Friday. "You don't think Lex or J.D. or Eddie?" I began. Tone bit her perfect bottom lip and shook her head. "I don't think so. I don't know." She hesitated. "Do you want to hear my theory?" "I do. It's the house. There's something wrong there. I always feel like something is watching us while we're there. I think. Okay, I know this sounds nuts, but I think there's a presence in Meadow House feeding off our visits, and has been for years. Slowly, but now it's getting stronger." I didn't answer for a bit, turning over the idea in my mind. It was crazy, but I'd also been feeling a rising unease with every visit to the house. "I mean, we only go there 4 nights a year," I said. "Even in 3 years, that's only a couple of collective hours." "Maybe that's enough." Tone stuck out her tongue. "Look, it's just my theory." I held up my hands. "It's a good theory. How do we test it without getting more people killed? I guess we could skip the campfire next week." "No. If I'm right and there's something brewing at Meadow House, it might already be too late to stop it. We should keep an eye on it. I think our next campfire should be inside the house, so that we can observe any weirdness," I asked, a little lick of terror climbing my throat. Tone nodded. "From the house, or from the group. The deaths being like the stories, Chris, there's a connection. I'm sure of it." She stood up. "Since we're in a secret society now with a mission dash, we are." "Absolutely. Anyway, now that we're in the secret society, we need to have an initiation." "Yeah, what is it?" Tone stood up and grabbed my hand. "You buy me ice cream." I wish I'd known then how our trip was going to end. I would have run and never looked back. Story 2. The Decay of Autumn. And my family, at least what remains of my family, has never been the kind to share stories, especially those telling of our history. You could imagine my surprise when I received my notice of inheritance of the wolf farm, once belonging to my Uncle Charlie and Aunt Clara. I blamed the long, lonesome nights for my growing curiosity, the curiosity that led me to the discovery of the separate, hidden diaries within the false bottoms of my aunt and uncle's respective nightstands. As I said, my family members seldom share stories, but I now find it imperative to break this trend. I have pieced together the separate accounts from their diaries and local news articles, and what I have discovered is unlike anything you have ever heard before. I have come to this sole conclusion. There are unexplainable beings in our world, truly sinister and ever-present. Below is the story I have created through my research. Charlie wiped his brow as thunder rolled in the distance. A symphony of raindrops fell on the crops and darkness washed over the farm as he pulled his tractor into the barn. Gunnar happily wagged his tail and greeted Charlie as he walked inside the dimly lit farmhouse. Drying his head with towel, Charlie called out to his wife, Clara, inquiring her plans for their supper. His question was met only with silence. Making his way to the base of the stairs, Charlie called out again. Lightning illuminated the interior of the home as his voice echoed through the halls. Charlie stared at the white carpet in horror during the brief moment of flashing blue light. Dark red droplets of liquid painted the stairs. Time stood still as Charlie ran into master bathroom, covering his mouth as he screamed an "oh," an "oh," an "oh" repeatedly. Clara cowered in the corner, her inner thighs stained crimson. She rocked back and forth, holding a blood-stained bundle of towels in her arms. Charlie crouched down and gazed at what was once destined to be their child. Anger and hopelessness rushed through his veins as he took the towels from Clara. She pleaded for Charlie to come back to her as he left the bathroom, descending the stairs and making his way outside into the pouring rain, grabbing a shovel from the shed. Gunnar kept his distance as he followed his master deep into the woods. Charlie struck the ground again and again as he dug the grave. Lightning danced along the trees as he placed the small, innocent corpse into the earth before filling the cavity with mud, and finally a large, flat stone. Charlie pointed the shovel at the whimpering dog as they retreated out of the woods and back home, promising the canine that if he ever dug up the grave, it would surely be the last thing he'd ever do. The 2 years following that night were the darkest Clara and Charlie would ever see. A series of droughts decimated the crops and steered Charlie's career from farmer to construction worker. When he punched out in the evenings, Charlie found solace in bourbon and Blair, the young, attractive bartender that poured it for him. Clara's days were filled with silence and daydreams of what should have been. She couldn't bring herself to unfurnish the nursery, complete with a rocking chair, crib, changing table, and pink block letters on the wall. The letters that spelled the name neither Charlie or Clara could bring themselves to say aloud. Autumn. The nursery door remained closed. An unspoken, unbroken rule. Summer came to an end as a chill filled the air. Charlie staggered through the door. Cold, untouched food rested upon the kitchen table. The stench of the bar clung to him. Periods of prolonged silence and resentment accompanied this and most dinners. Another month of infertility had came and went, and neither Charlie nor Clara felt the need to discuss it. As night fell, the couple completed their respective rituals. Charlie retreated to the recliner with the six-pack, and Clara retired to the master bedroom. She stripped to her underwear and stared at her body in the mirror as she placed her hands over her lower belly and recited a quiet prayer. As Clara closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep, a breeze whistled through the open window, and with it, a sharp noise pierced the silence. A voice whispered "Mama," and Clara's eyes burst open as she grabbed her stomach and gasped. Charlie snored, face down next to her on the bed as she got up and closed the window. The following morning was filled with gray overcast and cold, thin air. Clara lit a cigarette on the front porch as Charlie's truck disappeared down the gravel drive. His departure and Clara's anxiety retreated in tandem. Heavy fog danced atop the Wolf Pond and rolled along the desolate dirt patch that had once grown a vast sea of crops. Yet another reminder of what should have been. As Clara put out the cigarette and turned to walk inside, something along the tree line of the woods caught her eye. Approaching cautiously, she discovered Gunnar, still and staring at the threshold of the dense foliage. She called to him to no avail. Clara moved closer, trembling uncontrollably. The dog urinated on himself where he stood. She knelt down to console the frightened German shepherd. He turned and snarled, viscously snapping at her like a feral beast. Clara fell backwards in fear. She called out again as the dog turned and ran off in the opposite direction out of sight. That night when Charlie returned home, Clara told him of the dog's bizarre behavior. He theorized Gunnar likely picked up on a female scent and was filled with aggressive hormones. Charlie then broke the news to Clara that he would be leaving for a few days on a new project. She didn't feel the need to respond. Before bed, Charlie reminded Clara of two things. The first being her doctor's appointment scheduled for the morning, and the second was that today was an ovulation day. The smell of stale beer turned Clara's stomach as the couple struggled through unpassionate sex that evening. What was supposed to be the act of making love had become yet another tedious chore. Clara turned her head and looked down the darkness of the hall. Her heart began to race. The nursery door was ajar ever so slightly. Buzzing fluorescent lights filled the doctor's office with a low hum and harsh light. An elderly woman in a blue sweater smiled widely at Clara as she sat and read a magazine. When the nurse called Clara back, the old woman grabbed Clara's wrist and told her, "You're a wonderful mother." Clara stuttered a confused response and apology as she shuffled past. The doctor filled Clara's ears with the same story she heard over and over again, that all her levels looked normal, to keep trying, and get plenty of rest. Clara told the doctor of her issues with sleeping and anxiety. As she left the office with a fresh bottle of sleeping pills, she noticed the old woman was nowhere in sight. The night was quieter with Charlie gone and Gunnar still missing. Clara called Charlie's hotel room and was met with his annoyed tone. Charlie told her that he was exhausted and would be home in a few days. As she was hanging up, Clara thought she heard the sound of a female voice in the background. Clara convinced herself that Charlie probably had the TV on in the room. A double dose of sleeping pills kicked in, and Clara dreamt of the woods. Running through the trees in the darkness, Clara followed the harsh sound of a baby wailing in pain. The cries rang so loudly, she thought her ears were going to bleed. Clara fell to her knees in a clearing in the woods and listened for the cries. The wailing was muffled now, coming from the soil beneath her. She dug frantically into the earth, scraping and clawing grass and dirt. As she raked her fingers deeper and deeper, blood began to pool from within the hole beneath her. The bloody mud consumed her body as she sunk, and the baby's cries turned to laughter. Clara awoke in a cold sweat and hurried downstairs for a glass of water and a cigarette. Just as she calmed herself down, Clara nearly retched when she noticed the fresh dirt caked beneath each fingernail. Sleep-deprived, Clara looked out the window until the orange sunlight of dawn peeked through the blinds. She forced herself to get dressed and slowly made her way to the market. Clara couldn't help but feel as though she was simply going through the motions of life. After checking out at the register, Clara walked to her car and noticed a familiar face standing in the parking lot. She took a deep breath and approached the old woman from the doctor's office, still dressed in the same blue sweater. Her heart pounded in her chest. After a deep breath of confidence, Clara approached the woman and introduced herself. She told her they met the other day, and the woman nodded in agreement. Clara asked what she meant when she told her she was a good mother. The old woman spoke softly as she climbed into the driver's seat. She told Clara that she drives by the wolf farm every now and again and loves seeing her little girl playing in the woods. Before Clara could respond, the old woman waved goodbye and drove off. That night, Clara flipped on the TV and stared at the black and white screen. The noise and light soothed her as her eyes grew heavy once again, taking another white pill for good measure. The sound of the TV static woke Clara as the sun disappeared over the horizon, the volume increasing with each passing second. The light strained Clara's eyes as crawled towards the television, set on all fours. Reaching for the dial, the screen changed, taking her off guard. The static replaced with an image of a woman holding a baby in a rocking chair. Clara squinted at the screen as her eyes struggled to make out the details. She reached for the dial again, turning the TV off. Clara laughed at herself for foolishly being scared. As she got up from the floor, the TV kicked on once again. The woman now hung from a noose above the chair, which continued to rock back and forth. Clara gazed in disbelief, frozen in fear. The TV's sound of the rocking creaked rhythmically against the wood floor. Clara screamed and pulled the plug from a wall. The noise continued as she came to the realization that the sound wasn't coming from the TV, but from the rocking chair in the nursery upstairs. Charlie returned home that same evening, changing his shirt in his truck to hide the smell of Blair's perfume. He entered and was distraught when he found the farmhouse to be empty. He called for Clara, answered only by his echoes. And for the next few months, Charlie was alone. Family, friends, and neighbors searched the surrounding area to no avail. Clara had simply vanished without a trace. Blair frequented the wolf home as Charlie had come to the conclusion that Clara would not be returning. Charlie and Blair sat near the fireplace, drinking and talking as they did on most evenings. Tonight was different, however. Charlie's vision began to blur. Blair lied face down on the carpet after just half a drink. Charlie looked to the bourbon in his hand, then to the decanter. The flames of the fire danced as he swirled the amber liquid. White foam clung to the sides of the glass. Charlie stumbled to the bathroom, attempting to purge himself. Just before losing consciousness, he caught a glimpse of Clara's empty sleeping pill bottle in the waste bin. The blistering winter wind woke Charlie from his daze. The ropes that bound him to the large oak tree dug into his shoulders. He tried to call out, but only a small whimper escaped his lungs. As Clara approached him from within the woods, Charlie could hardly recognize her. Her disheveled clothes hung loosely from her gaunt frame. Clara stood before Charlie, and he was speechless. She told him of how she would leave him here to freeze to death, forgotten in the woods like their daughter. She cursed his name for taking their baby and burying her in the woods. Charlie pleaded with his delusional wife, begging her to remember the truth of that night. Tears streamed from his eyes as he recounted the memory of their stillborn child, the baby who was never given the chance to take her first breath. Clara only stared at him. The morbid realization that there was no getting through to Clara creeped in. Charlie sunk his head as he quietly sawed at the ropes with the knife in his back pocket. Clara walked closer and called him a liar as she stroked his cheek. "Autumn is ready for you." Charlie hadn't heard the name spoken aloud in years. The ropes held by just a few threads against his blade. Clara knelt down near the foxhole at the base of a large oak, and Charlie eyed her curiously. Clara whispered into the hole for a few moments before stepping away. Charlie's heart pounded in his chest as the creature emerged from the hole. His eyes and brain battled with one another as he tried to comprehend the distorted flesh, hair, and bone that stood before them on two legs, as if crudely impersonating a human being. Clara beamed with admiration, her vision and memories poisoned by the creature which guised itself as a beautiful child in her eyes. The ropes snapped with a final slash of Charlie's knife, and he fell before the creature, its decrepit fingers scratching Charlie's leg as he ran towards the tree line. The house came into view, and Charlie saw a glimmer of hope. His leg throbbed with pain. Yellow pus oozed from the wound the creature left. He fell to the ground as new memories rushed through his mind, memories of raising a beautiful, healthy daughter. Charlie writhed as he fought to full recollections, grasping to hold onto the truth. Clara and the creature stood before him once more. Charlie turned towards them, and Clara smiled, telling him of how he would truly see Autumn, his daughter, for the first time. The creature's transformation displayed before him, tricking his mind into seeing the child that never was. Enraged, Charlie scooped the creature up in his arms and ran. Clara followed slowly behind. The creature whispered into his ear as he stumbled towards the frozen pond. It told him that all would be over soon, how it would feed on them both, body, mind, and soul, just as it had fed on countless others for centuries. Charlie walked with the creature onto the thin ice. He turned and smiled at his wife one final time as a tear streamed down his face. In his arms he held the child, the one Clara promised he would see. In a final moment of clarity, Charlie saw the lie before him and jumped. His boots shattered the ice as he held the creature close, both descending into the darkness. And as the frigid waters took the life from Charlie and the creature, Clara's mind unclouded, free from pain, and ready to start anew.
Story 3. Every year my town gathers by the pond and waits for it to freeze. We have to hurry when it does. I grew up in New England, one of those tiny states all clustered together, so small their names have to be printed off to the side on the maps of the United States. Honestly, this may be hometown pride, but I have to say it's one of the most beautiful places in the world. There's just nothing like New England in the fall. The colors, the smell, the crisp air and change in the light. It's distinct, neither winter nor summer, a thing all of its own. In my town, more like a cluster of houses outside an actual town, autumn was both feared and celebrated. Every year we'd set out the usual decorations, the wreaths and pumpkins and cornucopias, and then we'd gather around the pond at dusk and wait. Every night from the first frost onward, waiting for the night that it would be cold enough for ice to form. We'd come out, dressed in our heavy winter gear, scarves and gloves and hats, and watch for the lights. It was a sort of coming-of-age ritual for the families that lived there. The little kids would be kept inside, watched over by an aging relative that couldn't participate anymore, until they were 8 or 9 years old enough to understand. Then they'd be brought out to join the rest, handed a shovel or a scoop, and sip cider or hot cocoa and eat apple cider donuts until their first shift was up. I'm sure it was deliberate that most of our first watches were early in the night. The sun could set as early as 7. Earlier in the winter, and it was almost never cold enough to freeze that early in the night, so most of us were hustled off to bed without incident. That was probably why I didn't witness my first freeze until I was almost 18. Winter came hard and fast that year, weeks earlier than expected. We'd barely assembled the first watch when the water began to freeze. My dad was the one to rouse me, giving me a good shake and tossing my snow boots on my chest. I got dressed in a hurry and followed him outside, excited for the gathering, which I still saw as an excuse to stay up and hang out with my cousins. It didn't hit me until later how worried he looked. Now, the lines etched on his face are echoed on my own. I smiled at my mom on my way out the door. Her voice followed me, urging me to be careful. I laughed because what was there to be careful of? We'd be standing around watching the water for a few hours, drinking something hot and eating treats. My breath fogged the air and I tugged my scarf a little tighter around my throat, awkwardly high-stepping my way through the snow and down to the pond. My dad was already there. I could see him with his back to me, standing there with a broad snow shovel watching the water, when all of a sudden he was lit up with a beautiful golden light. It was faint at first, noticeable but not that bright, like a single candle in a dark room, lighting up only a few feet in any direction. It reminded me of Christmas lights. Joyful, happy. Someone shouted. I heard something crack. It sounded like ice, and suddenly everyone was shoveling or throwing snow onto the pond. I watched in shock, stumbling up to my father's side just in time to see what looked like a woman smacking the underside of the ice. She was so pale. Her hair drifted around her in dozens of directions. The scarf around her throat was right up against the ice, which was so thin I could make out the individual threads beneath. "Don't look!" My dad shoved me with his shoulder. It knocked me off balance and I stumbled to the side, but not before I saw the lady slap the ice with her mittened hands once again, and the ice lift partially. Dad tossed a whole shovelful of snow onto her while I gaped in horrified silence. I looked around, hoping someone else had seen and would, I don't know, intervene? Stop him? Make sense of the madness I was witnessing? It looked like my dad was murdering this poor woman. We should have been helping. She was drowning, but instead he was piling snow onto her head, blocking out the light. All around me I saw people doing exactly what he was doing, though. Even my cousins were on their knees, shoveling snow with their hands, piling it onto the ice. And between the piles I saw other people like the lady, all of them strangers. No one I recognized until I did. A little boy, probably 10 or 12, with big dark eyes and a strange old-fashioned shirt. I'd seen his picture on my neighbor's mantle every time I visited. His name was Eric. He drowned in the sea over 50 years ago, caught in a riptide while playing with his friends. He was her brother, older brother. She was 70 now, in the house at the end of the street, helping watch over the younger kids. He pressed his hands to a crack in the ice. I watched it buckle and a thin, pale hand slide out, bloated and brackish. Beneath him I saw a perfect, tiny village. Picturesque little houses laid out, dusted in perfect piles of snow. Pond in the center. Tiny people gathered around it. Against my will I looked up. I couldn't seem to help myself. In the distance, beneath the clouds, I could see feet, legs, people, churning around, kicking and flailing. I looked back down and saw the arm of the boy, pushing through the ice. The village beneath him looked so sweet, so peaceful. All at once I knew. I understood what they were doing, my dad, the neighbors, everyone around me, and I dropped to my knees, heaving as much snow as I could far out onto the ice. Over the boy and his grasping, clutching hand. I stole glances at the sky as I shoveled mindlessly, piling more and more and watching the light up there grow dimmer and dimmer. I didn't stop until it was gone. Until the light in the sky and the glow from under the ice were totally blotted out. When it finally was, I reared back, exhausted and trembling, and looked at my father. His face was tight. "It gets harder every year," I heard someone mutter behind me. Someone else agreed soberly. My dad took me by the arm and helped me to my feet. We walked home together in utter silence. I never again looked forward to the first freeze of the year. 16 years later, we pooled together enough money to have the pond filled in. We gathered together on the banks one last time and watched a backhoe shovel dirt into the water the way we'd shoveled snow onto ice every winter. A pump nearby continued to siphon the excess water away, pouring it into the river that led down to the lake. That was our mistake. We should have left the pond where it was. To the people who live around that lake, we're sorry. We heard about what happened after the fact. I promise we didn't know it would carry like that.